Alrighty. Originally, when I put this class together, I labeled session 8, the one we're doing right now, intercultural. And then I thought about it. This entire class is intercultural. So I focused it. We've already talked about individualist and collectivist. Tomorrow we're going to talk about high and low power distance, and that's one of the major ways cultures are classified. So I thought what's missing, and what there are also Christian influences on, two dimensions, two categories that cross-cultural researchers put cultures into that help explain some communication behavior. So those two things are what we're talking about this session. One of them is uncertainty avoidance. That's also the work of Kurt Hofstede. He's the researcher behind individualist collectivist. And on the first day, in the second session, when I just had the two pictures of the guys side by side, he was the bald one on the left. So, uncertainty avoidance. The other one is often confused with uncertainty avoidance, but there are differences. Tight cultures versus loose cultures. That's the work of a psychology professor named Michel Gelfand. Not a bad thing to put on the board if I can remember where I put the marker, right there. Michel Gelfand. Now for this session, that's the only thing I had on the slides because there wasn't much else that I needed to show. So these slides, I'm not even going to bother to put up in Moodle because it's just those two lines. Let us talk about each of them. Kurt Hofstede measured uncertainty avoidance at the beginning with 4 questions, or these are representative of the questions he asked. Well, he had participants in his study agree or disagree with these questions. I feel anxious when the future seems unpredictable. So people from high uncertainty avoidance cultures, if they don't know what will happen next, makes them anxious. Low uncertainty avoidance, if you don't know what will happen next, that could be exciting. Second, it makes me uncomfortable when someone provides unclear directions. So high uncertainty avoidance, I don't know what they want. This is bad. Low uncertainty avoidance, they did not tell me how to do it. Good, I get to do it my way. And a third question, he asked, I prefer to manage my money with a highly structured budget and plan. So when you have money, do you lay out and plan how you're going to spend every last yen? Or do you basically know how much money you have and you spend it when you want to spend it? People from low uncertainty avoidance cultures might do that. All right. I will give it away. It probably will not surprise you. Japan is very high uncertainty avoidance, one of the highest in the world. There is a proper and expected way to do everything. The United States is moderately low, not at the very bottom, but far enough away from the top that it explains a fair amount of the difference when Japanese people and Americans communicate and don't understand one another. So here are some things you would find in a low uncertainty avoidance culture. People who are unusual, who are deviant, And people who have unusual ideas are not only tolerated, they're celebrated. There can be distrust, and this is true right now in the United States to a major degree, distrust of experts and distrust of organizations, distrust of government. I've had a number of people over here ask me, they bring up the subject of all the gun violence in the United States, and they say, why is it so hard for the United States to do something about all the mass shootings? So many other countries have just taken people's guns away. But and I'm not making this up, you will think I am exaggerating. A lot of people in the United States who own guns, they say, I keep a gun and am ready to use it because my government might become tyrannical. My government might take away my rights, and my government might try to come and get me, and I will fight back with my gun. Now that makes no sense. No sense at all. The government has an army with far better weapons than any homeowner with a gun. But that is the reason they'll give. They will say, if the government tries to take my rights away, I will go out into the streets with my gun. So in a low uncertainty avoidance culture, you may find they don't trust institutions. In low uncertainty avoidance cultures, and you'll recognize this, I think, in the classroom, it's good to have discussions. In high uncertainty avoidance cultures, classrooms tend to be very, very scripted. The teacher prepares everything. The teacher simply delivers the content. And in low uncertainty avoidance cultures, it's actually really good in a class when someone suddenly understands something or suddenly realizes something. You both have been really good in commenting on the questions. You've come up with explanations, and I've tried to be good about telling you that's a really good detail, that's a really good observation. The fact that they're unexpected sometimes is good. In very high uncertainty avoidance cultures, learning should be very orderly, and suddenly realizing something can be disorderly. Another thing you might observe in low uncertainty avoidance cultures, it's pretty common that there is job turnover. It's very, very common to quit your job and look for a better job elsewhere. That's happened a lot in this generation in the United States. People in their 20s and 30s are commonly being given the advice, don't stay at one job too long. You probably, if you're successful at the job you've got, you would be more valuable and would be paid more at another job. So take your successes and go hunt for another job and show them what you did at your current job and you'll get a raise. And you should do that. I've seen the advice about every 2 years. Now, in high uncertainty avoidance cultures, it's very common you find your job and you stay with it. And you may stay with it your whole life. Japan was famous for that for a very long time. Less true today, I'm told. But people I've met here have told me, depending on what kind of job, some places it's still true. There are some people who still find a job and then stay. So it's less true than it used to be, but it's not gone. And in the United States, it's very, very rare. One little detail, but an important one. It comes up a lot in cultural comparison. In low uncertainty avoidance cultures, running late is okay. In the United States, you can run a little late. 5 to 10 minutes late should be overlooked. You should not complain if someone else is 5 to 10 minutes late. High uncertainty avoidance cultures, another example, so I don't make it all about Japan, Germany is very high uncertainty avoidance. There is a proper, correct way to do everything, and you had better not be late. You had better be on time. I can also mention, by the data, the lowest uncertainty avoidance culture in the world is Jamaica. And the idea there is, you get there when you get there. We'll start when everyone's here. All right. So when I saw these next couple of examples from this lecture I give on uncertainty avoidance, I thought Fabi-san might appreciate this. An interesting comparison is Italy with China. Because Italy, by the data, is high uncertainty avoidance. China is low uncertainty avoidance. They are both the remains of ancient empires. Roman Empire, ancient Chinese Empire. The Roman Empire had a legal code that applied to everybody. Nobody was above the law. But in China, the emphasis was appoint rulers who are wise. And you don't write the laws too specifically. The wise ruler deals with each situation differently. And that has come down to the present day. But now, one other example that can pin down how uncertainty avoidance operates. China is also very similar to Singapore because China is very collective, and we haven't talked about power distance yet, but we will. China is high power distance, and so is Singapore. But China, we've said, is low uncertainty avoidance. Singapore is high uncertainty avoidance, very high uncertainty avoidance. When Singapore was founded, since its founding, their national identity has been that they are very, very threatened. They are very weak. They are a little city-state on the edge of an island they share with a bigger country. So the story that people in Singapore tell themselves of their country is that they always have to be ready to be under attack, and that makes them very high uncertainty avoidance. Mothers in Singapore tend to stay very close to their children and don't let them go play any way they like. Okay. The last example I have here before we switch gears and talk about tight versus loose is traffic rules. One of the reasons I would say the United States is moderately low but not extremely low, we tend to have in the United States pretty detailed, specific traffic laws. If you're driving a car, the lanes are painted, the signals are very explicit, and it's true in Japan as well. But if you've ever driven in a developing country where most of the roads are dirt, or the only other place I had been in Asia before I came to Japan, I had twice been to Cambodia. And if you've ever driven in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, they have traffic signals, they have lanes, and people ignore them. People drive anywhere they want, people run any signal they want. The rule, I'm told, is whatever you're doing while you're driving, don't stop. There's a hole in the traffic somewhere, drive through it. That's what you see in low uncertainty avoidance cultures. All right. Similar to uncertainty avoidance, but not identical. Michel Gelfand has made a case that some cultures are tight and some cultures are loose, tight or loose. It's possible for high uncertainty avoidance cultures to be loose. It's more common that they're tight. And I think if you were a low uncertainty avoidance culture, you would have to be loose. And in a moment when I explain it, you'll see why. In a tight culture, if there's a right way to do something, it's enforced on everybody with punishments. In a loose culture, even if there's a right way to do something and everyone agrees about the right way, they still tolerate people who do it differently. So now here's an example. In Saudi Arabia, a city called Jeddah, one of their biggest commercial centers, so a lot of business happens in Jeddah. The only religious buildings are all mosques for Muslims. Nowhere in the city are you allowed to have alcohol or pork. Women cannot have a driver's license. That may be out of date, but for a long time they couldn't. And women are forbidden to do a lot of other things without permission of a male relative. That's Jeddah. Now, in New York City, there are lots of Muslims living in New York City, and there are lots of mosques. But in New York City, you could have a mosque next to a liquor store, next to a gay bar. Because New York City is loose. Everybody gets to do what they want. And if you're an imam of a mosque in New York, you have to be loose. You can't impose it on everybody. One big clue about whether a culture is tight or loose is clothing. And Gelfand has extended her work not only to countries, but also to different kinds of jobs, to different professions. And she has said the legal profession, lawyers as a profession are very tight. And you can see it from their clothing. If you're going to go to court, almost anywhere in the world, you had better wear a dark suit that's appropriate, or a judge may yell at you and could even put you in jail for not being dressed the right way when court is in session. Now, one thing about tight and loose cultures, looseness tends to happen if a lot of outsiders with different ways move in. So where there's lots of immigration, tightness, it's very difficult to keep a tight culture when you have a lot of immigrants. And an associated detail is large cities are more likely to be loose than small towns. Because large cities are where the immigrants go, or at least where they go first. So if you put those two details together, Tokyo is actually kind of loose, moderately loose. But small town Japan is far more likely to be very tight. There's a right way, there's a wrong way, and it's enforced. I had an experience just this week that I put down as my example to help you think about tight and loose. Over at Tsuda, they are administering the entrance exam and they are grading it. And there is a rule that only the people involved with giving and grading the entrance exam are allowed in the building where my office is for the entire week. And when they told me that, I said, okay, I understand. You're giving the test, and you also don't want people disturbed while they grade it. But you heard me say on Monday, I get up really early, and they unlock that building at 5:30 in the morning. And nobody is in that building at 5:30 in the morning. And I asked them, if there's something in my office that I need to come here and teach this class, may I go at 5:30 in the morning and get it out of my office? And they said, no, you're not allowed in the building. 5:30 in the morning, nobody there, not allowed in the building. I thought, whoa. That was my moment of that's high uncertainty avoidance, and it's tight. It makes, forgive me, I'm even saying this on the recording, it makes no sense. But the rule is the rule, and the rule is for everybody, and for all the time. And I have been taught the expression, shogunai. And shogunai is pretty much saying the culture is tight. All right. Let me say a couple of more things about research into intercultural communication, some applications in communication. And then we can get to what I think is the Christian influence that makes things a little different. Okay. I'm almost tempted not to put her name on the board because I have her name and her picture in session 9, as you will see. But probably the leading scholar of intercultural communication is a woman by the name of Stella Ting Toomey. She is a model of what you need if you want to be an effective intercultural communicator. It's got 3 parts, and they're very simple. First, you need information about the culture. That will not surprise you. If you want to be effective communicating in Peru, you need to learn about Peru. So that's not surprising. Second, she says you need to be flexible in your thinking. So you need to be ready to say, they think differently from me. There's not just one correct way to think. And I will try to learn how they think so that I can be effective. Knowledge about the culture, flexibility in your thinking. Neither one of those are the ones that I want to apply here. It's the third one. The third one is the one I want to apply here. She says if you want to be an effective intercultural communicator, you have to be very mindful. Very, very mindful. I don't know if that word translates with the concept very well. The quick definition of it is that you see what's really in front of you, not what you expected to see. You're able to pay attention to what you're actually observing, not jump to conclusions or act on what you think will probably happen next. Distracted people do a bad job being mindful. People who are not distracted and who are really observant do a good job being mindful. Now, I bring this up because mindful people watch and they see moment to moment what other people are doing. But if you're from a culture that's very high uncertainty avoidance, then you know how things are supposed to be. And it hovers over you how things are supposed to be. People who are low uncertainty avoidance, moment to moment, they make up what they're going to do next. So, one of the impacts that uncertainty avoidance has on communication, let's put it this way. If you're from a high uncertainty avoidance culture, there are more things that other people can do that are shocking, that are so unexpected, they'll surprise you and maybe even upset you. Someone who's lived all their life in a low uncertainty avoidance culture is less likely to be shocked because people do what they want. And it makes it easier to observe moment to moment what they are doing. The second, you heard me say, it would have been on Monday when we talked about collectivism and individualism. Do you remember when I talked about appropriateness and effectiveness? And I said, let's say I needed 10,000 yen. I could go threaten someone with a baseball bat, or I could say nice things. That was talking about the model of communication competence. Now, another part of the model that I did not talk about then is also very simple. It's important to learn lots and lots of communication skills, lots of them, because communication situations are different. And the way I teach it to my students, you want to have a communication toolbox that has lots and lots of tools in it. So you can pull out the tool that's perfect for the situation. And if you only know how to do one or two things, like little babies, all they know how to do is cry really loudly. And I have known people who, whenever something unexpected happens, they get angry and raise their voice. And it seems like that's the one thing they know how to do. Being an effective communicator is about knowing lots of things to do. So another place, high uncertainty avoidance can make a difference with communication. You might have fewer tools in your toolbox because you might have learned lots of ways of communicating are not the correct way. I mentioned to you this morning that I teach public speaking. I teach public speaking more often than I teach anything else. I've had so many people say, how can I change the way I give a speech? How can I lose my accent? How can I stop doing whatever it is that they do? And most of the time I tell them, you shouldn't. You should speak the way you are. Probably the people you're speaking to appreciate the way you speak. There's not one right way to do it. People have their own style, and people's individual styles are beautiful. I mean, it's almost going back to perichoresis. I want to see lots of people speak differently. Okay, so those are where we wind up saying uncertainty avoidance and the tightness of culture make a difference in communication. So if we're going to say that the United States is different, what might be the influence of Christianity? And I'm done with this, so this is going away. Oh, no, wait, no, I'm not, because I think there's a Bible passage. Yeah, there are a couple of them. That was dumb. And now, of course, this is going to take a minute before it decides to come back on. Let's see if I can... Oh, it did. Good. We still don't need it for a minute. Okay. If you were to talk to a Christian just about anywhere, in the United States, in Japan, anywhere, you would quickly come to the idea that Christians have Christian freedom. They can't talk that long without talking about Christians have been set free. And if you try to say, well, there are certain behaviors you can never, ever do, a Christian commonly might speak up and say that you were being legalistic. And legalism, being legalistic, is bad. Is against what Christianity teaches. Now, I think that's kind of a simplified view. But I do want you to understand what it means. Because if you deal with Americans, and in particular Americans who are Christian, Americans who aren't Christian really, really hate being told what to do. And in tomorrow's session on persuasion, we're going to go a little deep into that. But right now I can say non-Christian Americans find high uncertainty avoidance cultures very uncomfortable because they like being able to do what they like. In general, they talk a lot about freedom. And the worst possible thing to a lot of Americans is that their freedom might be threatened. I think this has Christian roots. First thing, I mentioned before the whole first part of the Bible. As a matter of fact, a little more than half of the Bible is also the holy writing for people who are Jewish. Jewish people do not treat the back part of the Christian Bible as at all inspired. The back part is what talks about Jesus. Jesus was Jewish. His entire life, he was an observant Jew. In the first part of the Bible, God gave the law. He told the people of Israel, these are my commands, you are to obey all of it. But what the second part of the Bible teaches, what Jesus taught, and what the letters of his disciples also taught. The purpose of the law was to show us what I have been saying since Monday. God's standard is perfection, and we can't live up to it. The way the law worked in ancient times, today you might break the law, you might be given a fine, and you have to pay money because you broke the law. Back then, they took what made them wealthy, and it was animals, sheep, cows, livestock. And when they broke God's law, they had to go to the temple and take a sheep or a cow and kill it and sacrifice it. And that was what you did whenever you broke the law. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, every time they broke the law, they would take from their own animals, they would take an animal to the temple, and it would be killed to make up for the fact they had broken God's law. When Jesus came, I said back on Monday, he knew he would be arrested and he would be put to death. And I've said a bunch of times that was offered as a free gift to everyone. Really, and this is the language of the Bible. Jesus was offering himself as a sacrifice for everybody's breaking of the law for all time. Now, Jesus never in his life broke God's law even once. If he had ever broken God's law, then when he was killed, that would have been payment for his own disobedience. But because he never broke God's law, but still was killed, God allowed him to give that voluntary death to others as a gift. So, do you remember yesterday when I explained even good people have to repent? Because bad people do bad things and they should stop. But good people try to do so many good things that God will be forced to say, okay, you're good enough. That was my explanation yesterday. Here's the part where we're going to get to the explanation. When God gave the law, the religious teachers and leaders, what they wanted to do, they wanted to teach the people to obey the law so carefully that they didn't get even close to breaking the law. I'll give you one example. The law said every seventh day was called the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, you were commanded to rest from working. Now, what the leaders back then taught was anything that could be work was forbidden on the seventh day. So you couldn't pick anything up and move it because carrying something was work. You couldn't walk more than a few dozen feet because walking was work. There was one ruling that you could not spit on the ground because when you spit on the ground, the spit makes the dirt part, and that's the same thing as plowing a field, and plowing a field is work. The leaders called this building a fence around the Torah. And all of these lessons became traditions. And today, there are still Jewish people, and their name for themselves is they are not, this is a decent word to put on the board, although I'm running out of room. There are Orthodox Jewish people, but then there are ultra-Orthodox. And what they try to do, they wake up every morning and they try to obey every law in the Bible and every ruling that the teachers have given over the years. And I mention them to say, I think they are the highest uncertainty avoidance culture on earth. Because absolutely everything they do, there's a right way and a wrong way. It's a good thing to wash your hands before you eat a meal. Ultra-Orthodox people, in the middle of eating a meal, will wash their left hand 3 times while saying a prayer, and then wash their right hand 3 times while saying a prayer. And they do it every time they eat, because they've been commanded to do it. And they have similar laws that they have to follow. They have prayers that they say when they wake up. They have, there's a long list of things that they do, and they have to do it detail by detail. So what I am going to play for you right now is what Jesus had to say about that. Because the religious leaders of the day came to him and they said, why are you not obeying the law? Your followers don't wash their hands the way they're supposed to. You do work on the 7th day when it's not allowed. And this is what Jesus said. That's not right. It didn't work. So what Jesus said, as he taught the crowd, he at one point said, the law, it's not being done away with. it won't go away until it has been fulfilled. But when Jesus lived his entire life and he kept everything in the law, never broke God's law even once, it was fulfilled. And one of the letters, we've looked at the letters a couple of times of an apostle named Paul. He wrote to a church that had been founded at a city called Galatia, and the name of the letter is Galatians. And the followers of Jesus at Galatians, they thought that they could not be followers of Jesus unless they kept keeping all the law. And he wrote to them to explain that that was not true. So I've got a quick little passage right here. So a big part of the reasoning behind this, you've heard me say since Monday that the idea at the heart of Christianity is that God invites everyone to become his daughters and sons. And we've said a couple of times, when you successfully raise a daughter or son, what you hope, while they are small children, you give them rules that they have to follow. But you want them to get to the point where when they are adults, they'll make choices that are the kind of choices you raised them to make, and they won't need rules anymore. And if your adult daughter or son comes to you and says, "What are the rules now?" you might say to them, "Well, you get to make your own rules now because I've raised you. You're an adult now." And in some sense, what Christianity teaches is Jesus satisfied the law. We still study the law. It's still written down. But we don't try in our daily lives to keep track of every single law and obey it. Instead, we try to learn what is it that God wants from us, and we make every choice with the motive to glorify God, which is different. It's like being the adult child of a parent. You're not guided by rules anymore. You're guided by knowing your parent. And because you know your parent, you know what will make them proud. And I do admit I have one more, just very short passage. This is just 3 verses long. And it's based on what I just said about this being a family relationship. This is from a letter that was written to be circulated to people who were still observant, practicing Jews. The book is called Hebrews. Whoops. All right. So Americans tend to be very low in uncertainty avoidance. And along with that, American culture is very loose. Part of that may be from the history of it being a nation of people who immigrated in. So many people are different that we tolerate, that we accept. People have different ways of doing things. We tend to have fairly loose understandings of what the proper way is at all, and where we have one, if people break it, that's okay. They're just doing their thing. I think that has Christian roots. I am going to kill the recorder.